The Alien Princess's Dilemma. Princess Suitor stood on the balcony of her grand palace, her violet eyes scanning the endless sprawl of stars in the night sky. She was the crown jewel of the Zeltari Empire, a realm known for its unmatched power and beauty. Her people adored her, and suitors from across the galaxy had traveled unimaginable distances to win her favor. But Suitor had a reputation, a cold, unyielding heart that no man or alien could melt. The Zeltari Council was growing impatient. War loomed on the horizon. The Kralik Empire, a ruthless rival, had been expanding aggressively, absorbing smaller systems and threatening the Zeltari borders. An alliance through marriage could be the key to survival, but Suitor had rejected every single proposal. "You cannot keep dismissing them, my daughter," her father, Emperor Ulthar, said one evening in the council chamber. His voice carried the weight of authority, but his eyes held worry. "The Kraliks are preparing for war. We need allies, and your marriage could unite us with the strongest forces in the galaxy." Suitor straightened her back, her shimmering silver gown catching the light. "I will not be reduced to a bargaining chip, father. I will marry only if I find someone worthy." "And who will be worthy enough for the great Princess Suitor?" sneered one of the council members, a grizzled old diplomat named Vekrin. "You've turned away warriors, scholars, and even princes. What more do you want?" Suitor's voice was sharp, her tone unyielding. "I want someone who challenges me, someone who doesn't see me as just a prize to be won." "Is that so much to ask?" The council murmured amongst themselves, frustration evident in their faces. The situation was dire, and Suitor's obstinance only seemed to worsen it. Then a voice spoke from the shadows of the chamber. "Perhaps it is time to think outside the usual candidates," said Amtharion, a mysterious emissary who often advised the emperor. He stepped forward, his dark cloak swaying as he moved. "There is a species known for their unpredictability, their resilience, and their unique way of thinking. They call themselves humans." The room erupted in laughter. Humans were a relatively new addition to the intergalactic stage, often seen as primitive compared to the advanced civilizations that ruled the stars. Their home planet, Earth, was considered insignificant, and their culture, though peculiar, lacked the sophistication the Zeltari admired. Suitor raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a disdainful smile. "Humans, you expect me to consider a mate from that backwater planet?" Amtharion remained unfazed. "Humans have achieved much in a short time. Their creativity and determination are unmatched. And perhaps a human might surprise you, Princess." The emperor stroked his chin, considering the idea. "It is unorthodox, but perhaps Amtharion has a point. A human suitor would certainly bring a fresh perspective." Suitor crossed her arms, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Fine. Invite one, if you must, but don't expect me to take this seriously." And so, the Zeltari announced the grandest matchmaking ceremony in their history. Invitations were sent to the farthest corners of the galaxy, summoning warriors, scholars, royalty, and, to the amusement of many, a single human. The ceremony would test their intelligence, strength, and character, with the hope that one might earn the hand of the proud Princess Suitor. The announcement spread like wildfire, causing a stir across the stars. While most saw it as an opportunity, many scoffed at the inclusion of a human. Who would be foolish enough to step into a competition where they were already outclassed? On Earth, Commander Jack Harlow sat in a modest outpost, sipping his coffee as the invitation scrolled across his datapad. A seasoned space explorer, Jack had faced countless challenges in his career, but this was something else entirely. He chuckled, shaking his head. Marry an alien princess. Sounds like a bad joke. But Jack was no stranger to risk. After some persuasion from Earth's leadership, who saw the invitation as a chance to strengthen humanity's standing in the galaxy, Jack agreed. "I'll go," he said, "but not to win her over. I just want to see what all the fuss is about." When the day of the ceremony arrived, the palace gleamed with gold and crystal, a testament to Zeltari grandeur. Zinera sat on her throne, her expression calm, but her mind restless. One by one, the suitors arrived, each grander and more ostentatious than the last. Warriors from the Gorthan system flexed their muscles. Scholars from the Vryn galaxy recited their achievements. Princes from mighty empires showered her with lavish gifts. And then, a simple man in a plain uniform walked into the hall. Jack Harlow, with his easy grin and relaxed demeanor, looked completely out of place among the extravagant displays of wealth and power. Zinera's eyes narrowed as she studied him. He wasn't like the others. There was no arrogance in his step, no desperation to impress. Instead, he stood before her with quiet confidence. The room erupted into whispers and chuckles as Jack gave a polite nod. "Commander Jack Harlow, representing Earth. Pleased to meet you, Princess." Zinera smirked, leaning forward slightly. "You're either very brave or very foolish, human." Jack's grin widened. Maybe a bit of both. For the first time in years, Zinera felt a flicker of curiosity. Who was this human, and why wasn't he trying to impress her like the others? She didn't know it yet, but Jack Harlow was about to change her life. And the fate of the galaxy. Forever. Enter the human. The grand halls of the Jalteri Palace were alive with the hum of alien voices, each representing a different world, species, and ambition. The air was thick with tension as suitors from across the galaxy made their entrances, each more extravagant than the last. Massive warriors from the Gorthan system stomped in, their crimson armor gleaming under the chandelier's light. Noble scholars from the Vryn galaxy glided through the doors, their robes shimmering with embedded starlight. Every alien present carried an aura of pride, confidence, and a fierce desire to claim Princess Zinera's hand. But amidst this glittering spectacle, one arrival caused the crowd to fall silent. Jack Harlow stepped through the towering golden gates, dressed in a simple black uniform that bore the emblem of Earth. His entrance lacked the dramatic flair of the others. No fanfare announced him. No guards flanked his sides. He carried no exotic gifts or elaborate gestures. Instead, he walked with an easy confidence, his boots echoing softly against the marble floor. The silence gave way to whispers. A human. They actually sent a human. Does Earth have no sense of shame? How could this primitive hope to compete? Jack ignored the murmurs, his eyes scanning the room with calm curiosity. He'd been briefed about the grandeur of Jalteri culture, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. The palace was a marvel of advanced engineering and artistic mastery, its walls etched with patterns that seemed to shimmer and shift as you looked at them. Yet Jack's focus remained on the raised dais at the far end of the hall, where Princess Zinera sat. Her presence was magnetic. Draped in a gown of flowing silver that caught the light like liquid metal, Zinera radiated authority and grace. Her violet eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto Jack the moment he stepped inside. She studied him with an expression that was equal parts amusement and disdain. Jack approached the dais and bowed slightly, his movements deliberate and respectful. "Commander Jack Harlow, representing Earth," he said, his voice steady but unpretentious. "It's an honor to stand here, Princess." Zinera leaned back in her throne, resting her chin on her hand as she regarded him. "Earth must truly be desperate to send someone like you," she said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Do you even understand what this ceremony entails, human?" Jack straightened, his expression neutral but his eyes twinkling with subtle humor. "I've read the briefing, Your Highness. Tests of strength, intellect, and character, right? Seems straightforward enough." Her lips curved into a faint smirk. "And do you honestly believe you have a chance? Look around you." She gestured to the other suitors, many of whom were glaring at Jack with thinly veiled contempt. "You're outmatched in every way." Jack turned his head, giving the room a slow, deliberate glance. The Gorthan warriors puffed out their chests, their muscles bulging as they tightened their grips on ceremonial weapons. The Vryn scholars exchanged smug smiles, as if already dismissing him. Even the Zeltari nobles in the crowd watched him with pity, as though he were a child who had wandered into an adult's game. Jack shrugged and looked back at Suitor. Outmatched? Maybe. But I've always believed that being underestimated is an advantage. The room erupted into laughter, and even Suitor allowed herself a small chuckle. Yet, beneath her amusement, she felt a flicker of something unexpected: curiosity. This human wasn't cowering or groveling like the others. He wasn't trying to dazzle her with strength or intellect. He was different. "Very well, Commander," Suitor said, her voice carrying a subtle edge of challenge. "Let's see how long your confidence lasts." The first test began almost immediately. The suitors were escorted to an enormous arena, its walls glowing with ancient Zeltari inscriptions. The task was a traditional trial of strength, lifting a sacred obelisk that weighed more than most starships. One by one, the suitors stepped forward, showcasing their might. The Gorthan warriors performed admirably, roaring as they hoisted the obelisk high above their heads. The Vryn scholars relied on advanced exosuits to enhance their physical abilities, managing to lift the obelisk just enough to pass. When Jack's turn came, the crowd leaned forward in anticipation, eager to see him fail. Jack approached the obelisk, placing his hands on its smooth surface. He gave it a testing push, then stepped back and shook his head. "I'm not here to play the same game as everyone else," he said, turning to the judges. "I pass on this round." The crowd burst into confusion, their whispers growing louder. Was he giving up already? What kind of fool refused to compete? Suitor's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "Are you admitting defeat, human?" she called out. Jack glanced up at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "Not defeat, princess, just strategy. There's no point in competing in a test that doesn't play to my strengths. I'd rather save my energy for what matters." His words sent a ripple through the room. The suitors muttered amongst themselves, some sneering while others frowned in thought. Suitor tilted her head, her curiosity deepening. This human was either incredibly clever or completely reckless. As the trials continued, Jack's unconventional approach became a recurring theme. He didn't overpower opponents in combat or outthink scholars in puzzles, but he used clever tactics to stay in the competition. He avoided direct confrontation, instead focusing on observation, adaptability, and unexpected ingenuity. By the end of the day, Jack Harlow hadn't won a single trial outright, yet he was still standing. His resilience and calm demeanor left the crowd, and Suitor wondering what he might do next. That night, as Suitor sat in her chambers, she found herself replaying the events of the day. For the first time in years, a suitor had piqued her interest, not with strength or brilliance, but with something far rarer: unpredictability. And for a princess who thought she'd seen it all, that was something worth watching. The princess's curiosity. The golden sun of Jelta Prime dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace's crystalline spires. The trials had concluded for the day, but the echoes of the humans' unorthodox strategies lingered in the minds of everyone present, none more so than Princess Suitor. Reclining in her private chamber, she gazed at the holographic display floating before her, reviewing the events she had witnessed. Jack Harlow, the human. He was unlike anyone she had ever encountered. She tapped her slender fingers on the armrest of her chair, her expression a mixture of curiosity and frustration. "What are you hiding, human?" she muttered under her breath. Her personal attendant, Lyra, stood nearby, cautiously observing her mistress's mood. "Your Highness, if I may speak freely." Suitor waved a hand dismissively. "Go on." Lyra hesitated before continuing. "The human. He doesn't seem to be here to win you over like the others. He has a strange confidence, as if he's not afraid of failure. Perhaps that's what makes him different." "Different is an understatement," Suitor replied sharply. "He ignores the rules, avoids confrontation, and yet somehow manages to stay in the competition. Either he's a fool or a genius. Lyra smiled faintly. Perhaps he's both, Your Highness. Zenera couldn't help but chuckle. Perhaps. The following morning, the suitors were summoned to the Garden of Trials, an expansive otherworldly labyrinth filled with towering plants, shimmering waterfalls, and ancient statues that seemed to breathe. This trial was a test of intellect and adaptability. The goal: navigate the maze, solve its puzzles, and reach the central pavilion where Zenera awaited. The suitors entered one by one, each armed with their unique skills and technology. Some relied on holographic maps, others on advanced AI companions. Jack, however, entered the maze with nothing but a small utility knife and a portable scanner. He didn't seem concerned. In fact, as he stepped into the labyrinth, he paused to admire the alien flora, touching the leaves as if he were on a nature walk rather than a high-stakes competition. Zenera watched through a live feed projected in the pavilion, surrounded by her council and advisors. Her focus, however, was entirely on Jack. "Why does he linger?" she asked aloud, leaning forward. The others are already deep into the maze. Antherian, the enigmatic emissary, stepped closer. "Humans have a peculiar way of processing challenges, Your Highness. They often observe before they act. It's a trait that has served them well in survival." Zenera narrowed her eyes at the screen. "Or he's stalling, waiting for others to make mistakes." Antherian smiled knowingly. "Time will tell." Inside the maze, Jack moved at his own pace, studying the environment. The walls seemed alive, shifting subtly as if the labyrinth were responding to the competitor's movements. He noticed faint patterns in the floor, symbols that glowed faintly when touched. After a moment of consideration, he knelt down and pressed one, causing a hidden door to slide open. "Interesting," Jack muttered, stepping through. He wasn't the only one making progress. The Gorthan warriors used brute force to smash through obstacles, while the Vryn scholars deciphered complex riddles with ease. Yet each group hit a snag, a section of the maze that seemed unsolvable. Frustration grew as time ticked on. Meanwhile, Jack's approach was entirely different. He didn't rush. When he encountered a puzzle, he experimented with trial and error, using his scanner to analyze energy flows and structural weaknesses. Each success brought a small, satisfied smile to his face. "What is he doing?" Zenera muttered, her curiosity growing with each passing minute. Jack wasn't just solving the puzzles. He seemed to be enjoying himself, as if the trial were less about impressing her and more about learning something new. Halfway through the maze, Jack stumbled upon an unexpected scene. A Gorthan warrior, trapped under a fallen pillar. The warrior roared in frustration, his comrades nowhere in sight. Jack crouched next to him. "Need a hand?" The warrior glared at him. "I don't need your help, human." "Suit yourself," Jack said with a shrug, standing to leave. But then he paused, glancing back. "You know, I could leave you here, but I've got a feeling we might both benefit from getting you out of this mess." The warrior hesitated before nodding. Together, they used Jack's scanner to identify weak points in the pillar, then combined their strength to lift it enough for the warrior to escape. "Why would you help me?" the Gorthan asked, clearly puzzled. Jack smiled. "Sometimes it's not about winning. It's about doing what's right." Unbeknownst to Jack, Zenera had watched the entire interaction. Her expression softened as she replayed his words in her mind. "Doing what's right," she whispered. Hours later, Jack emerged into the central pavilion. He wasn't the first to arrive. 2 suitors had beaten him there, but he was far from last. He walked into the clearing, wiping dirt from his hands, and gave Zenera a casual nod. "Princess," he said, "nice setup you've got here." Her lips twitched in amusement. "You seem to enjoy taking your time, Commander." Jack shrugged. "Rushing only makes you miss the details." As the remaining suitors trickled in, Zenera couldn't shake the feeling that Jack's presence had begun to shift the dynamic of the competition. He wasn't trying to win her favor through strength or intellect. Instead, he was showing her something she hadn't realized she valued: authenticity. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her chamber, Zenera found herself staring out at the stars, thinking of Earth, thinking of humanity, and thinking of Jack Harlow. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't quite name, something that made her look forward to the next trial. The threat of war. The Geltari Palace bustled with activity as the next day of trials began, but an unease hung over the royal court like a storm cloud. Whispers of an imminent attack by the Kralik Empire had reached the council. While the trials continued, preparations for war were underway in secret. Princess Zenera, though outwardly composed, felt the weight of the brewing conflict. She knew the stakes. Her people's survival could depend on the alliances forged through this ceremony. Jack Harlow, however, seemed oblivious to the rising tension, or perhaps he was simply unconcerned. As the suitors gathered in the Grand Assembly Hall, he leaned against a pillar, quietly observing. His relaxed demeanor stood in stark contrast to the others, who were either boasting about their previous victories or strategizing for the next trial. "You seem far too calm, human," said Racker, a towering Gorthan warrior, as he approached Jack. "Don't you realize what's at stake here?" Jack glanced up at the hulking alien, a faint smirk on his face. "Oh, I'm very aware, but stressing about it won't help me think straight, will it?" Racker scoffed, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You're an odd one, Harlow. An unexpected infiltration." As the morning progressed, the suitors were led to the arena for the next trial. A team-based challenge designed to test leadership and cooperation. Each team was assigned a scenario, a simulated rescue mission, and tasked with saving a group of hostages from a mock enemy stronghold. Zenera watched from her private observation room, her eyes flicking between the competitors as they strategized. Jack was assigned to a mixed team, including Racker and a Vryn scholar named Ilith. Their approach was unconventional, driven largely by Jack's insistence on improvisation. "We don't need a perfect plan," he told them. "We need flexibility. The enemy won't stick to a script, so neither should we." The trial began, and Jack's team moved through the simulated stronghold with surprising efficiency. While the other teams rely on brute force or rigid strategies, Jack's group adapted to every challenge, using the strengths of each member to their advantage. Zenera found herself leaning forward in her seat, captivated by Jack's ability to lead without dominating. He gave orders, yes, but he also listened, something few suitors had ever done. But then, chaos erupted. Midway through the trial, alarms blared throughout the palace. The simulation froze, and Zenera's voice echoed through the arena. "All competitors, evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Jack's instincts kicked in as he noticed movement in the shadows. "This isn't just an evacuation," he said to Racker and Elith. "We're under attack. The Kralik invasion." The Kraliks had infiltrated the palace, their sleek insectoid ships breaking through the planetary defenses in a surprise assault. Their goal was clear: abduct Princess Zenera and force the Geltari Empire into submission. As the suitors and staff scrambled to safety, the Kralik invaders spread through the palace, their biomechanical weapons cutting through Geltari security forces. Jack, however, didn't head for the evacuation point. Instead, he grabbed a discarded energy rifle from a fallen guard and turned to Racker and Elith. "If they're after the princess, we need to stop them." Racker growled in agreement, hefting his massive blade. "Finally, a fight worth my time." Elith hesitated. "This isn't part of the trial. If we get caught—" Jack interrupted, his tone firm. "This isn't about the trial anymore. You're either in or you're out." Elith's hesitation melted away, and she nodded. "I'm in." The trio moved through the palace, dodging Kralik patrols and coordinating with scattered Geltari guards. Jack's military training came to the forefront as he issued clear, concise orders, ensuring their small group stayed one step ahead of the invaders. A daring rescue. Meanwhile, Zenera found herself cornered in the royal garden, her usual composure slipping as Kralik soldiers closed in. Her personal guards had fallen, and her energy blade was all that stood between her and capture. She fought valiantly, her movements precise and lethal, but she was outnumbered. Just as a Kralik warrior lunged at her, a shot rang out, and the alien collapsed. Zinera turned to see Jack Harlow emerging from the shadows, his rifle smoking. Behind him, Racker and Eleth engaged the remaining Kraliks, their combined strength turning the tide of the skirmish. "Commander Harlow," Zinera said, her voice tinged with surprise and something else she couldn't quite place. "What are you doing here?" Jack grinned, offering her a hand. "Saving the day, Princess. Isn't that what humans are known for?" Zinera hesitated, then took his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. "You could have escaped with the others." "Could have," Jack replied, his tone casual. "But where's the fun in that?" The group made their way through the palace, fighting off Kralik forces as they went. Jack's resourcefulness and quick thinking kept them alive, and Zinera found herself impressed despite her initial skepticism. He wasn't just brave, he was clever, adaptable, and fiercely protective. The turning point. By the time they reached the palace's command center, the Kralik forces were retreating, their plan thwarted by the unexpected resistance. Jack's group had played a pivotal role in the defense, earning the gratitude of the Zheltari guards and the admiration of the suitors who had witnessed their heroics. Zinera stood in the command center, watching the remaining Kralik ships vanish into the void. She turned to Jack, her expression unreadable. "You've done more for my people in one day than most suitors have done in their entire lives." Jack shrugged, his easy smile returning. "I wasn't trying to impress you, Princess. I just did what needed to be done." "Perhaps that's what impresses me," Zinera admitted softly, though her tone quickly regained its sharp edge. "Don't let it go to your head." Jack chuckled. "Wouldn't dream of it." As Zinera watched him leave, she felt a strange warmth in her chest. For the first time in years, she wondered if she had finally met someone who wasn't just worthy of her, but who might also challenge her to be better. The bond grows. The Kralik attack left the Zheltari palace shaken, but its walls still stood, and the invaders had been repelled. In the aftermath, the suitors' trials were temporarily suspended, allowing the royal court to regroup and assess the damage. For most of the suitors, the attack was an unwelcome interruption. For Jack Harlow, it was an opportunity to observe and learn. Jack sat on a stone bench in one of the palace's mini gardens, polishing his rifle as he watched the palace staff rebuild shattered walls and replant damaged flora. His presence didn't go unnoticed. Zinera stood on a nearby balcony, her violet eyes narrowing as she observed him from a distance. "Why is he always so calm?" she muttered to herself. Antharian, the ever-watchful emissary, stepped forward from the shadows. "Perhaps it is the nature of humans, Your Highness. Their ability to adapt to chaos is what has allowed them to thrive on their volatile planet." "Adaptation," Zinera repeated, her tone thoughtful. She turned to Antharian. "Have him brought to me. I want to understand what makes him different." A conversation in the moonlight. Later that evening, Jack was summoned to Zinera's private gardens, a secluded area of the palace reserved for the royal family. The air was cool and filled with the faint glow of bioluminescent plants, their soft light casting ethereal patterns on the ground. Jack entered cautiously, his boots crunching on the gravel path as he approached Zinera, who stood by a shimmering fountain. "You called for me, Princess," Jack said, his voice casual but respectful. Zinera turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I did. I wanted to thank you for what you did during the attack." Jack smiled faintly. "Just doing my job." "Your job," Zinera repeated, stepping closer. "You're not a Zheltari guard. You're not even from this galaxy. So why risk your life for me and my people?" Jack paused, considering his answer. "Where I'm from, we have a saying. You don't leave anyone behind. Doesn't matter if they're a friend, a stranger, or even someone who doesn't like you much." He gave her a pointed look, his grin softening the edge of his words. "It's just the right thing to do." Zinera's eyes searched his, looking for any trace of insincerity. She found none. "You're an odd creature, Jack Harlow." "I get that a lot," Jack replied, leaning against a nearby tree. "But you didn't bring me here just to thank me, did you?" Zenara hesitated, then gestured to the fountain. "Sit," Jack complied, sitting on the edge of the fountain as Zenara paced in front of him, her silver gown catching the moonlight. "I've met countless suitors in my life. Warriors, scholars, princes. They all try so hard to prove themselves. But you're different. You don't seem to care about impressing me." Jack tilted his head. "Do you want the truth?" "Always." Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't think you need impressing. You're already smart, strong, and capable. If anything, I think most of these suitors are trying to prove they're worthy of your attention because they know they're not." Zenara froze, his words catching her off guard. "And you? What about you, Jack Harlow? Do you think you're worthy?" Jack shrugged. "That's not for me to decide. I'm just here to be myself. If that's enough, great. If not, well, I'm not losing sleep over it." A shared vulnerability. For the first time in years, Zenara felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crack. She had always seen suitors as opportunists, each one more eager than the last to use her for their own gain. But Jack was different. He wasn't trying to take anything from her. If anything, he was giving her something she hadn't felt in a long time: honesty. "You're either very brave or very foolish," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Why not both?" Jack replied, his grin infectious. They spent the next hour talking, not as princess and suitor, but as equals. Jack told her about Earth, about its chaotic history and the resilience of its people. He shared stories of his time as a space explorer, the wonders he'd seen, and the dangers he'd faced. Zenara, in turn, spoke of her responsibilities as heir to the Jalteri throne, the pressure to always appear perfect, and the loneliness that came with it. "I've spent my whole life trying to be what everyone expects me to be," she admitted softly. "But sometimes I wonder if anyone sees the real me." Jack's expression softened. Maybe they're too busy looking at the crown to see the person wearing it. Zenara looked at him, her violet eyes shimmering. "And what do you see, Jack?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "I see someone who's tired of being put on a pedestal, someone who wants to stand on level ground for once." For a moment, the only sound was the gentle trickle of the fountain. Then Zenara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I do." The bond deepens. As the night deepened, Zenara found herself feeling something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Hope that there was someone in the galaxy who might understand her, not as a princess, but as a person. When Jack finally rose to leave, she stopped him with a single word. "Wait." He turned, his eyebrows raised. "Yeah." Zenara hesitated, then stepped closer. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." Jack smiled, his eyes warm. "Anytime, princess," as he disappeared into the shadows of the garden. Zenara stood by the fountain, her heart racing. For the first time, she wondered if this human might be more than just different. He might be exactly what she had been searching for all along. The rivals return. The Jalteri Palace, still recovering from the Kralik attack, was buzzing with cautious optimism. Repairs were underway, security had doubled, and the trials were set to resume. Yet, in the quiet corners of the palace, shadows moved with a sinister purpose. The Kraliks were not done. And this time, they intended to strike harder, faster, and with devastating precision. A fragile piece. Princess Zenara stood on the observation deck, her gaze fixed on the stars. The faint glow of distant galaxies was a comforting sight, but her thoughts were far from serene. The Kraliks' motives were clear. They sought to weaken her empire by taking her as leverage. Their failure during the last attack had only made them more dangerous. Behind her, the doors slid open with a soft hiss. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. You always find the quietest places, Jack said, stepping beside her. He leaned against the railing, his relaxed posture a stark contrast to the tension in the air. And you always seem to find me, Zenara replied, her tone softer than she intended. Jack smirked. Maybe I just enjoy the company. Zenara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. You're different from the others, Jack. They all see me as a means to an end. But you treat me like I'm just another person. Maybe because you are, Jack said simply. You're smart, strong, and capable, sure. But underneath all that, you're just Zenara. For a moment, she allowed herself to smile. And who is Jack Harlow beneath all that bravado? A guy who's in way over his head, he admitted with a chuckle. The Kralik ambush. The peaceful moment was shattered by the blaring of alarms. Zenara stiffened, her hand instinctively moving to the hilt of her energy blade. What now? Jack muttered, his senses immediately on high alert. A voice crackled over the intercom. This is Commander Lothar. The Kraliks have breached the outer defenses. They're targeting the princess. All personnel, secure the royal family. Zenara's eyes widened. They're here. Jack grabbed her arm, his voice firm. We need to move. Now. The two sprinted through the palace corridors, flanked by royal guards. Explosions echoed in the distance, and the sound of blaster fire grew louder with every step. The Kraliks had come in greater numbers this time, their forces more coordinated and determined. Their objective was clear: capture Zenara at any cost. A dangerous gamble. As they reached the palace's central command center, Jack quickly assessed the situation. The Kraliks were using advanced cloaking technology, making them nearly invisible to Jalteri scanners. They had infiltrated deeper than expected, and their forces were closing in on the throne room. We can't just keep running, Zenara said, her tone sharp. We need to fight. Jack shook his head. You're the target. If they get their hands on you, it's over. And if I keep hiding, it'll only embolden them, she shot back. This is my empire, Jack. I won't let them destroy it while I cower in the shadows. Jack stared at her, his respect for her growing. All right, princess, what's the plan? Zenara stepped to the central holographic map, pointing to a narrow corridor near the throne room. If we bottleneck them here, we can buy time for reinforcements to arrive. But we'll need to hold the line. Then we hold it, Jack said without hesitation. The battle for the throne room. Jack, Zenara, and a handful of guards fortified their position in the corridor. The Kralik's insectoid forms emerged from the shadows, their biomechanical weapons glowing ominously. The air crackled with energy as the first wave attacked. Jack's training kicked in as he fired precise shots, taking down enemies with deadly accuracy. Zenara fought beside him, her energy blade a blur of light as she parried and struck with precision. The guards fought valiantly, but the Kraliks kept coming, their relentless assault threatening to overwhelm the defenders. Fall back to the throne room, Jack shouted, covering the retreat. They barricaded the massive doors, but it was clear the Kraliks wouldn't be held off for long. Jack turned to Zenara, his voice grim. We need a last-ditch move. Got any surprises up your sleeve? Zenara's eyes flicked to a hidden panel on the wall. There's an emergency defense system tied to the throne. It'll take out everyone in this room, friend and foe alike. Jack frowned. That's not a plan. That's a suicide mission. It's a last resort, she said firmly. But we might not have a choice. An unlikely savior. As the Kraliks breached the throne room, Jack and Zenara prepared to make their stand. Just as the enemy forces surged forward, a deafening roar echoed through the room. Racker, the Gorthan warrior, charged in with a squad of reinforcements, his massive blade cutting through the Kraliks like a hurricane. You didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did you, Harlow? Racker bellowed. Elith, the Vryn scholar, followed close behind, deploying a series of energy barriers that pushed the Kraliks back. Together, the reinforcements turned the tide of the battle. forcing the Krallics to retreat. The aftermath. As the last of the Krallics fled, the throne room fell silent. The guards began assessing the damage, and medics tended to the wounded. Jack leaned against a pillar, catching his breath. "Not bad for a primitive human," Zinera said, her voice tinged with exhaustion, but also admiration. Jack gave her a tired grin. "Not bad for a stubborn princess." She stepped closer, her expression softening. "You risked your life for me again. Why?" Jack met her gaze, his voice quiet but resolute. "Because you're worth it." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the battle hanging between them. Then, without a word, Zinera placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of gratitude and something more. As the palace began to rebuild once again, Zinera found herself thinking not of the trials or the Krallic threat, but of the human who had stood by her side through it all. For the first time, she began to wonder if Jack Harlow wasn't just different, but irreplaceable. The choice. The Gelteri Palace, though battered and bruised, stood tall against the backdrop of Gelta Prime's twin moons. Repairs were underway, but the true scars lay hidden beneath the surface, wounds of trust, pride, and the burden of survival. Princess Zinera stood in the grand throne room, her gaze fixed on the shattered remnants of the ornate doors that had barely withstood the Krallic assault. The echoes of battle still lingered, but her mind was focused on a decision that could shape the future of her empire. The suitors gathered once more, standing in a semicircle before her throne. Warriors, scholars, and nobles, all waiting to hear her decree. Among them was Jack Harlow, standing off to the side, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't adorned in regal attire or surrounded by an entourage. He stood alone, his presence unassuming yet undeniably magnetic. Zinera rose from her throne, her voice steady as she addressed the room. "The trials have tested your strength, your intellect, and your courage. Each of you has shown remarkable qualities, and I commend your efforts. But now, the time has come for me to make my choice." A tense moment. The room was silent as Zinera's eyes swept over the gathered suitors. Many puffed out their chests or stood a little taller, eager to catch her attention. Jack, however, remained still, his expression unreadable. He didn't vie for her gaze or try to outshine the others. He simply stood there, waiting. Zinera's heart raced as she spoke, though her exterior remained calm. "I have spent my life bound by duty, my choices dictated by the needs of my people. But today, I must make a decision not just for my empire, but for myself." A murmur rippled through the room. This was not the expected rhetoric of a Gelteri ruler. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, and several suitors frowned, sensing the weight of her words. "I choose not the strongest or the smartest," Zinera continued, her voice growing stronger. "I choose the one who has shown me what it means to be seen, not as a princess, but as a person." Her eyes finally landed on Jack. "Commander Jack Harlow, step forward." A shocked audience. The room erupted into chaos. The suitors muttered in disbelief, some openly protesting. A human, one of the Gorthan warriors, growled, "This is an insult to our traditions. This is highly unorthodox," a Vryn scholar added, his voice laced with disdain. Even the council members were visibly unsettled. Emperor Ulfar, sitting beside the throne, leaned forward, his expression torn between concern and curiosity. "Zinera, are you certain of this choice?" Zinera turned to her father, her tone unwavering. "I am. Jack has proven himself time and again, not just through his actions, but through his character. He is not here to take from us. He is here to build with us." Jack, hearing his name, finally stepped forward. He moved with a quiet confidence, his boots echoing on the marble floor as he stopped before the throne. He looked up at Zinera, his usual humor replaced by something deeper, more serious. "Princess," he said, his voice calm, "are you sure you want to do this? I didn't come here expecting this kind of responsibility." Zinera smiled, her expression softening. And that's exactly why you're the right choice, Jack. You never wanted the throne. You never wanted power. You only wanted to do what was right. That's what my people need. The final test. Before the decision could be solidified, a Kralik hologram appeared in the center of the room. It was their leader, a towering figure with sharp, insectoid features and a voice that dripped with malice. Princess Zinara. The Kralik leader sneered, "You insult us by choosing a human. This decision will cost you dearly. Surrender now, or we will return with a force you cannot withstand." The suitors tensed, many of them drawing weapons or shouting challenges. Jack, however, stepped forward, his gaze locked on the hologram. "Enough with the threats," Jack said, his voice cutting through the noise. "If you wanted to wipe out the Zeltari, you would have done it already. But you haven't. You know why. Because you're afraid." The Kralik leader hissed, but Jack pressed on. "You're afraid because the Zeltari aren't alone anymore. They have allies, real allies who don't care about politics or power plays. You can keep sending your forces, but every time you do, we'll be here to stop you." Zinara watched in awe as Jack stood his ground, his words silencing not only the Kralik leader, but also the entire room. The hologram flickered, then disappeared, leaving a tense silence in its wake. A new beginning. When the silence broke, it wasn't with outrage, but with applause. It started with Racker, the Gorthan warrior, his massive hands clapping slowly. Then Elith, the Vryn scholar, joined in, her reserved demeanor giving way to a small smile. One by one, the others followed, until the throne room echoed with the sound of approval. Zinara stepped down from her throne, standing beside Jack. She extended her hand, her voice ringing out for all to hear. "Together, we will forge a new path, not just for the Zeltari, but for the galaxy." Jack hesitated, then took her hand. "Let's hope you're ready for a little chaos, Princess." Zinara laughed softly. "With you, Jack, I wouldn't expect anything less." Epilogue. As the suitors departed, some in frustration, others in quiet acceptance, Jack and Zinara stood on the balcony overlooking the palace grounds. The stars stretched out before them, a vast and endless frontier. "You know this is just the beginning," Zinara said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Jack nodded. "Yeah, but it's a good beginning." She glanced at him, her eyes shimmering. "Do you ever regret taking risks, Jack?" He smirked. "Never. Especially when they lead to moments like this." For the first time in years, Zinara felt truly at peace. Together, they would face whatever came next, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. With Jack Harlow by her side, she was ready for anything.